that we may learn and accept your teachings.
Abençoe, coloque suas mãos sobre nós.
We ask you to place your hands upon us.
É o que te pedimos e agradecemos.
And this is what we pray and
Em
thank
nome
you
de
for.
Jesus. Em nome
In
de
the name
Jesus.
of Jesus.
Amém.
Amen.
I want to welcome everybody to our second presentation. This will be my first of two presentations for this camp meeting. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So for this presentation, I've left the chat open, which I don't normally do. So I want to ask everybody not to put random comments on there. If I ask a question and it's not rhetorical, then I'll ask for people to give an answer. If you choose to give an answer on the chat and you see that more than 5 or 6 people have answered, please don't respond. Otherwise, we'll have lots of people responding to the same question and I won't deal with everybody's answer. I may also take the opportunity to actually ask individuals to unmute and to give a verbal response. So I've been told that that should work. But if there's any problems with it, any technical problems, my translator can let me know and we won't use the audio, we'll just stick with chat. Okay, if that works well for this meeting, I'll do the same in my second presentation. Thank you. So I've received a number of questions for this camp meeting. And I want to try to answer several of them. There are many, I won't be able to get through them all. Some are more involved than others. So the first question relates to Matthew chapter 13. We're all familiar with Matthew 13. The parable of the wheat and tares. So I presume that most of you know that I've done numerous presentations on this parable. Before this study, I did a series of presentations on the nature of humanity. And what ended up developing or coming from those studies on the nature of human beings was a concept that people called the 7 steps of salvation. So what ended up happening that 2 separate studies, one on Matthew 13, one on the nature of humanity, ended up being combined together. And myself, with a small study group, tried to investigate Ellen White's writing on the subject of the nature of humans. And the fruit of all of that study ended up being this concept of the 7 steps of salvation. And what ended up being, I would suggest, a quite simple and straightforward study on Matthew 13 which can obviously be found in the Bible, but Ellen White develops it in the book Christ Objects Lessons. Ended up being quite a detailed, if I might say, sophisticated study. Because rather than just dealing with the basic symbols of the parable, the study of the nature of humanity was overlaid upon that parable. And at least for me personally, that study became much more meaningful. When I say that study, I mean the study of Matthew 13. So 2 separate studies were combined. Matthew 13, the subject of the wheat and tares, and the process of salvation or the nature of human beings. So I'm hoping that most of you have at least a vague familiarity or a vague memory of those studies. Where we would create a line with 5 waymarks for dispensations. And this was done in the period of 2016, 2017. Where we would have the ploughing, the former rain, latter rain, and harvest. Okay, so that was the ploughing, former rain, latter rain, and harvest. So we have that. And what we then did was overlaid the steps of salvation as we find in inspiration over that simple parable. And then a third step was taken. And I believe all of this was done in the 2016, 2017 era. So let me ask a question then, and maybe someone might respond on the chat. What was the third step to this study? So as people are going to respond, just going to repeat what I've said. We took a simple study of Matthew 13, the subject of the wheat and tares. We took what Jesus said and then what Ellen White said about that parable. And we did nothing particularly clever. What we did was take the words, which is one of the important methods that we use to understand our message. In fact, it's the first step and the primary step that we're required to take, which is look at the words. So no one has responded on the chat yet, so I don't know if that's working or not. I assume it is because someone originally sent a chat message. So I don't know if people aren't going to respond or not. Thank you. People have started now. So we took this simple study and we looked at the words. And we did nothing more. We tried to employ William Miller's rules. So we then took a separate study, which was The Nature of Humanity, which was done in 2017. And then that study was developed. And I want to remind everybody that even though we speak about the nature of humanity, that study and all studies similar to it are really all about the humanity of the Christ. Ellen White tells us that the humanity of Christ is everything to us. And for those of us who were in the movement in that history, these two separate studies, Matthew 13 and the nature of Christ, ended up causing two separate shakings in the movement. We lost members that had been in the movement, I'll say from the very beginning. And it led to the loss of one of our most significant teachers of that era. So these studies were really impactful at the time. So lots of people have given me really good answers. And my question was, we had Matthew 13, parable of the field. Then we had a separate study, which was the nature of Christ, I'm going to call it now. Which is the same study as the nature of humanity. And then we combined them. And we created a line with the standard 5 waymarks and 4 dispensations. And then we did one more step. So all the answers were good that people gave. But the third thing we did was to take a completely different model we didn't do it this way, but I'm going to answer it this way. So I'm going to put a book and a chapter. Revelation 14. The study wasn't done that way. So that is just a hook or a reminder. So the third step, maybe someone might want to write the answer in the chat now. Good, we've got the answer straight away. So we then were able to overlay the 3 angels onto this parable, onto this line. So for me, the reason why this study was important, was significant, and if I might add, correct, is because it took 3 individual subjects and combined them together. Now, the movement had dealt with these 3 subjects independent of one another up to that time. Particularly the third one, the work of the angels. People had individual or private ideas about the process of salvation. Which ended up becoming consolidated in 2017, as I mentioned earlier. And then it was overlaid upon the agricultural model. And so by taking these 3 separate ideas or models, I think it gave us integrity in the conclusions that we came to. And without people quoting directly, the conclusion of that 3-part study has been used repeatedly by many speakers, many teachers after that. Even though they won't reference that study. So when you hear people doing presentations, creating lines, they end up leaning upon or utilizing elements of this study without referencing it, perhaps sometimes without realizing it. Now, we know that what happens in the world happens in the movement. They end up being mirrors of one another. That's something that we have understood for a long time. Sometimes the experience or the example we have misunderstood. Often we have missed important characteristics that we could learn from. One of the things that I think we have learned or we should have learned from external events is that we should have constant diligence. Just because we think something is an established idea in society, it doesn't mean it's safe or secure or can't be challenged. And it also doesn't mean that it's properly understood. So if you take those thoughts, those ideas that I've just spoken about with reference to the world or externally, you can apply those same ideas to us internally or in the movement. Unless we keep things in the forefront of our minds and repeat them, people will be forgetful. New members will never be taught these ideas or these truths. And they will begin to be challenged. And when they're challenged, people will sometimes naively think of these new ideas as new light. So this is the preamble to question 1. Question 1 is quite simple compared to how long I've laid out this, my response. But I wanted us to see it as a learning experience. I wanted to remind us of the integrity of this study. I wanted to remind us of the steps that were taken to create this line. And I also wanted to just remind us why I think, not that this line is particularly important, but why it has integrity. because it used, I'm just going to call it standard methodology, William Miller's rules, on 3 separate subjects and combined them. And I want to suggest it combined them in a way that has stood the test of time, stood the test of investigation. And I've spent so much time laboring this point because this doesn't just apply to this question, it applies to many questions that people are asking today. I'm not trying to worry people, but I am suggesting that we don't speak enough about methodology. And something that I was reminded of on a recent trip to Tahiti by a close friend was that they reminded me of a study that had been done in 2019. And it was just one portion of that study that I'm going to just refer to now because it stuck in my mind at that time, a few weeks ago. I'm just going to put it over here because it's not directly connected with the question. These percentages are just symbolic. Don't take them in any literal fashion. So there was a time when I would reiterate this point over and over again in studies.
You'll need to unlock your iPhone first. There's nothing called point over and over.
Sorry, my assistant was trying to help me with the answers. That's what we are. So, does anybody know what this refers to? It's 90-10. Okay, so it's a bit vague, so I wouldn't be surprised. It's not that. Someone's put study versus sermons. No. So I'll give the answer. So this was words. So if that's word, what's that one? Okay, so someone's got it. Yeah, Marcel has got it. Structure. So I used to say that when you're doing your study, when you're trying to work out the answer, you need to focus on the words and the structure. The most important thing is that you need to focus on the words. And only once you've done that, then you can look at structure. So structure would obviously be waymarks or what we would call a line. You can't create a line without the words. But when you come to the conclusion of your study, what has the most significance? a story about a field, or a line that you can create? We know the answer to that. It's the line. It's the structure that has a significance when you come to the final analysis. So as you develop your model, your theology, your prophecy, when we talk about a model, that's what I'm referring to. I'm referring to a prophetic understanding of something or a theological understanding of something. So as you're creating that, it has to be done using words. We would normally call that inspiration. So I'm going to just call that the book. How many books do we have? What do people think when I say how many books do we have? One of the books is the Bible. What's the other book that we have? Good. Someone has said nature. And we had the Bible. So I want us to hold that thought in our mind. You're going to create a prophetic understanding or a model. You have to look at the words. You have to go to the book of words, the Bible, or the book of nature. But that's not enough, because you'll get some truth, some warm, fuzzy feeling. Some joy, some happiness, perhaps. Or you can get sadness. Israel is going to be destroyed. A remnant will be saved. It's just like an emotional roller coaster, up and down. It has some utility, but not much. Then you look at structure. The kingdom is divided between the north and the south. You have time. You have 7 kings. You have beasts. So once you start adding those components into your model, you can begin to use the structures that you have to develop meaningful or prophetic conclusions to these stories. So the structure ends up being the most significant, because that's what we want to create at the end, at the conclusion. We want to create a line. But you need to look at the words. So I've called it words because more often than not, we go to the Bible spirit of prophecy, and we would call that inspiration. But Ellen White also talks about the book of nature. So would we consider that the book of nature is inspiration as well? So we've defined inspiration in a very simplistic fashion. Would we consider nature to be inspirational? And perhaps if I define inspiration in just a user-friendly fashion, not a dictionary definition. Information or instruction from God. Things that derive from God. So if we define inspiration in that way, the origin of what we are seeing is from God, not from a lesser source. If that's the case, then nature, I would suggest, is also inspiration, a source of inspiration. Of course, both books have their weaknesses and their strengths. So each has their pros and their cons, each dangerous on their own. So I've used the word nature because that's what Ellen White says. But I want to use a different word now, or a different concept, but it's similar. And I'm going to call it the world. We might call it the things that are happening all around us. You might think of climate change. You might think of it as natural disasters. You might think of it as geopolitical events. So what I want to suggest is that if you want to develop a prophetic model, you have to use all the tools available, which means you have to look at the world. Ellen White might call it nature. But if you can look at plants or animals who share the world with us, you can look at us, humanity, the people of the world, and you can see the handwriting of God in all the things that people do. Everybody wants to look beautiful because we're lovers of beauty, because that's part of our nature. People are jealous because jealousy is part of our nature, because it's part of God's nature. any emotion that you have, all of them stem from God. And it's our emotions that drive how the world functions and operates. So when you do a study, you need to not just look at the structure. You can't just go to Matthew 13 and try to get some significant prophetic understanding from a field, a farmer, some plants and servants. So I had field, plant, farmers and servants, so that we remember. You need more than that. And that's why this was significant. So not only are you allowed to look at the words or Bible and spirit of prophecy, you look at the world around you, and if you want to make sense of that, first you have to read carefully, and then you have to look at some kind of structure. And that's how you get a line. So an example of this would be 9/11. So we might argue that 9/11 is an inspiration. But its significance to the movement is because of the year that it occurs in. And that isn't in the Bible. You may be able to find some model about the east wind or the angry horse in inspiration. This inspiration, the written one, but you have to go to the world or nature and see something. To go to the city of New York and see something happening as we see here, 9/11, 2001. Read all that correctly and then create a prophetic model based upon some structures that you can create. Because that event was, I'm going to call it the fifth waymark that was missing from Ellen White's writings. She gave us all the other ones except that one. So I wanted to remind us of this way of looking at things, the way of studying, because it's important. Okay, the question. How does the concept of elder test being a plant which means being part of the problem, affect the concept of her being the third angel, or her giving the third angel's message. So this was something that was addressed in all of these studies. But because these studies aren't spoken about often nowadays or taught, people can forget. So what the answer to this is really is relatively simple. But I wanted to label the point to remind us of how this was created, this structure, using this important methodology. So for those who are just listening, the important study was Matthew 13, the nature of Christ and the angels. To make sure that you are confident that you're doing it correctly or coming to the correct conclusion, you need to use words and structure. And the focus when you're information gathering, when you're developing your ideas, is with the words. And in the early days of this movement, the reason we kept on, I want to phrase it this way. I don't want to call it why we made mistakes. I want to say why we stumbled and fell often. Is because we were naive and inexperienced in using these techniques or these rules. And after the Sunday Law of 2014, we came to a period in our experience that we became much better at using William Miller's rules to understand prophecy. And this is a gentle reminder as we approach the Sunday Law that unless we remember how God led us to this point, the models that people are generating, the concepts that people are coming up with today, will have flaws in them, will have defects, unless people stick to the rules. Okay, so the question is, how can you be a plant and an angel? So the first thing I want to remind us is that for quite some time now, we have looked at angels as being individuals. I think that's correct. It's okay to do that. But what we seem to have forgotten is that we're all priests. Therefore, we have an equality, we have a solidarity. And what that means to me in this context is that all of us are both the first, second, and third angels. All of us are. I just want to remind us of that. And I also want to remind us, which again is not a new concept, is that we are both observers and actors. So there's a play that's going on, a theatrical performance. And we're in the audience watching the play. But we're also actors in the play. And that's the simple answer to this question. Depending on the point that you're trying to make or the story that you're trying to tell, we can be both the servants and we can also be the plants at the same time, depending upon the point that we're trying to make. So I'm not being critical to the person who's asked this question. I'm really not trying to do that. But I want to remind us that this question got answered over, I think, 7 years ago, something like that, a long time ago. This is not a new question because we'd already seen the potential confusion or potential problems in addressing this role that we would all have, these two roles. And it's completely legitimate to have both experiences at the same time. So Elder Tess being a plant does not affect her role as the third angel. So I want to remind us that based upon the structure of Matthew 13 and the steps of salvation, years ago now, I would venture to say before the midnight cry, at least in that history, at least in the history of the increase of knowledge, as it begins in 14 and ends in 19, that we had already placed the first, second, and third angels' messages on a line. And today, there are people questioning where to place those angels. So before we begin to consider the placement of those angels, I just want to remind people how all of that was developed, how it was created. It wasn't guesswork. It wasn't just going to a paragraph in early writings or a chapter in the Great Controversy. There were literally hundreds of hours that were put into understanding all the information that we had before conclusions were made. So that's question one. So a number of questions that I've received deal with the subject of feminism. And one of the recurring themes, because it's about feminism, is connected to the idea of radicalism. Radical feminism. So can my host just give me a timestamp? How much time do I have left? Is it 20 minutes? Oh, she can answer that in a second. Okay, great. So we want to have a look at, before we answer the question, we want to look at radical feminism. So we'll put it over here because we're going to put a question up here in a moment, or it'll probably in the next presentation now, I think. So we want to have a look at radical feminism. So as you all know, I was with Elder Terry in Fiji last week. And due to technical problems, we weren't able to live stream or record the meetings. But one of the subjects in my presentations that I dealt with was the understanding of the term radical feminism, what it meant. So I want to discuss that in this in this weekend. But before we discuss radical feminism, I want to discuss liberal feminism. What do we think liberal feminism is? Tell me what you think liberal feminism is. I'll wait for a couple of answers. So I've got two answers so far. Just wait for it if anybody else wants to say something. Okay, so I've got 5 answers, all good answers. So that will be enough answers for those who haven't said anything yet. So I'm just going to read out the answers. I'm not going to do them in order, but I'm going to group them together. So we're looking at liberal feminism, and one of them is personal liberty. And we'll give an example. Makeup. So I hope you all understand what makeup is. Personal adornment. So liberal feminism is that people are now at liberty, women are now at liberty to wear what they want, use makeup as they see fit. They can do what they want. So that's one answer that I got. And I got another answer. And we'll call this one the personal is the political. So just want you to think about this. When we think about liberal feminism compared to radical feminism, one of the banners that we wave in our movement, one of the things that we talk about a lot or promote is this idea of the personal and the political. And therefore, I think many people in the movement have understood that this idea of the personal is political is a radical feminist concept. So I just want us to think about that. So someone said a working definition of liberal feminism is and it comes under this subheading of personal is political. And they've described it this way. Emphasis on political change, but not personal choice. So this member has said, if you're a liberal feminist, then your mission in life is to strive for political change. So it's not about your personal choice, your personal freedoms, what you want or what you could have or what you desire. So I said want, have, and desire. Want, have, and desire. So it's not about you, it's about a wider subject or a wider experience. And they've described it as political change. So without trying to put words into that member's mouth, without trying to speak on their behalf, we might think perhaps of the suffragette movement. They wanted political change, and it came at a personal cost. The cause, the mission, was more important than the individual. So I hope you will understand that member's definition of liberal feminism. So if we were in person, the question I initially would have asked was, is liberal feminism good or bad? Then I would have asked, is radical feminism good or bad? And we all would have said, that's good, radical feminism is good, because it's part of the Midnight Cry message. But we might not be sure if liberal feminism is good. Because it has this idea of liberalism. And we have this idea that maybe there's something bad about that. People, women, are all being very liberal, which is why we've got this idea of personal liberty. You're free to do what you want, wear what you want, dress as you want. Very liberal. Other people have said it's about the personal and political. I read out what one person said. And I gave the example of suffrage. Live for the cause, the mission, the message, the movement. Don't worry about your own personal happiness. I want us to see that two members have a very different understanding of liberal feminism. One said it's about personal freedom. The other one said It's nothing about your personal freedom or your personal happiness. It's about the mission. You're just a small cog in a large machine. A cog is a gear. Or you're just a soldier in an army. And the army must win. And if you have to lay down your life for the cause, do it. Okay? Someone else has said, the personal is not political. Someone else has said, the emphasizes the choice of a woman being her empowerment. So I guess that one would be about personal liberty. A woman can make choices for herself. Someone else said, advocates for equal representation within patriarchal structures. So what that person is saying is that we have a world that operates in a certain way. And like Paul, the person didn't say this, I'm adding this, because I did a study on this recently. And I think some of us might remember the title for that. I think that was in Guadeloupe last year. So is it about principle or pragmatism? Pragmatism is, let's be realistic. We're not going to get 100%. So let's be content with what we can get. What we can get within the system. So I'm going to read the member's answer again. Liberal feminism advocates for equal representation I'm going to paraphrase that. Liberal feminism advocates for equality within the patriarchal structures. So I'm going to rephrase or paraphrase that response again. Liberal feminism advocates for equality within the existing structures that we have in the world or in society. So someone else has given a very similar answer. Liberal feminism is equality. We all believe in equality, don't we? We say we're radical feminists and we believe in equality. this member has said it's striving for equality, achieving equality, without tampering or changing the structure or the system of patriarchy. And I got a French answer, which I'm going to try to translate, my first translation in live. And it says the personal is not political. How about that? I hope that's a correct interpretation. Okay, so now I'm stuck because we've had some different answers. And we don't have time to have a dialogue or a discussion. We don't even have the ability to do that properly. So we had different answers, some very different. And what is the correct answer? So I'm going to give you my thoughts. And before we ever get to radical feminism, I want to encourage all of us here today and there are many of us, to look up liberal feminism. And when you look it up, you have to look at it from different perspectives. So you look at the words, and that's most of the work, remember? You have to make sure you know what the word liberal means and what feminism means. And then you could place it in a structure. First, second, third, fourth wave feminism. See where it dovetails into history. Dovetail means to where it comes into history, if we all got that. And then you can get, hopefully, a much better or holistic understanding of what liberal feminism is. So if we were to do that, and we take the essence of this word liberal, it's not really dealing with the subject of having personal autonomy to do what I want. That's not an incorrect definition. Free to do what I want would be a reasonable definition, but it has to be understood in a context. So let's assume that we are a conservative movement. We're very strict about what we eat, what we wear, how we dress, how we look. We wouldn't mind being radical feminists because we're told that's being good. But then we'd compare and contrast. And we'd say, oh, liberal feminism must be bad. It's too liberal. Women are going to start wearing funny things. Adorning themselves in ways that aren't appropriate. We don't want any of this liberal stuff. And others would say, that's the old way of looking at things. That's a problem that men have created. Women should have the personal liberty to dress and look how they want. For a long time, many people within our movement were living in this box. This box of, it's about personal liberty to live how I want to live. I, the woman. The feminism bit. And I have personal liberty to do what I want. The restraints have been taken off. So you end up having either a fight or a discussion or a clash. Can women dress in a certain way, or should they not dress in a certain way? But I want to suggest, as some others have, that's not what liberal feminism is about. It's not about personal liberty. I'm going to give you my thoughts, but I'm going to use the words of one of the members, paraphrased. So some people might say it's about the personal is political. And we don't have time to explore that. So I'm going to say it's about politics and, as some people have said, it's not about the personal. So that's the one I'm going to go for. And I'm going to state it this way, which is the words of one of the members, paraphrased. Liberal feminism advocates or promotes equality. And it does it in a framework. And the framework within which it operates or functions is within the existing system or structure. That's the politics bit. That's the existing structure. I'm going to call it framework. So it's all about promoting good in an existing structure. At the cost of personal pain. But I'm going to write on the personal, don't care. So liberal feminism is about achieving equality in the world as we have it today. Let's take advantage of everything that we have. But what we shouldn't do is worry or focus on the personal cost to the individual. I said we don't care. I'm going to use another idea. And these are a bit cheeky. No pain, no gain. And I don't know if the next one I'm allowed to say, because it might be copyrighted. Just do it. Don't worry about how much it hurts. A famous phrase from history. It might not translate too well. I'm going to use the word ours, which means us. So it's the word ours, which means us. So ours is not to reason why. That means we should not question. Ours is not to reason why. We should not question. Ours is but to do and die. So it rhymes in English. Don't question, just die. If you suffer, it's okay. Okay as in necessary. And I think that's what liberal feminism is. It's not about what women wear. That they're free to dress any way they want to. It's a much more significant idea. It's about self-sacrifice. It's not caring about your wants, your needs. You put the midnight cry message before your personal safety, before your personal enjoyment. It's better to suffer and sacrifice for the cause. So it's not about the personal bit. That's not what makes liberal feminism interesting. I said interesting, but what I really mean is significant to our understanding. It's this one here, the framework. Liberal feminists want equality. So the equality that they want will be achieved in a certain way. And what sets them apart from us, hopefully. So we've already given now the answer about radical feminism because we're comparing and contrasting. They want change, equality, but they will do it using or through the existing power structures. So some of us have got 24 hours, others of us have got 23 hours to think about this before we talk again. As we move on to question number 2, and this is the preamble for all of that. To try to understand what it means to be a radical feminist. Because the way I've just described this is that liberal feminism is actually something that's really good. It's not this personal liberty that we should be afraid of how women will now dress or how they will live. It's not that at all. I want to suggest it's something completely different. And we've got one day to concur. With that, I want to thank you, and we'll close with prayer. Holy God, we thank you for your watch care and your goodness over your people. For those of us who have been in the movement for many years, we can see how you have led us step by step. For those of us who are new, may someone help us. Lord, send us teachers who will review past studies, that would show us how this message has been developed and created step by painful step. On the borders of the Sunday law, We want to make sure that we are making right decisions, correct choices. That we understand the signs of the times all around us. Help us to understand what it means to be a priest, wise, a radical feminist. In Jesus' name, amen.